السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وآله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد, we praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala abundantly the way he deserves to be praised. We ask Allah to exalt the mention and grant peace and send his blessings and salutations upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Brothers and sisters in faith, as you can see to my right side, depending on your screen, I guess, you can see our honorable guest, brother Michael Abraham. Jazakallah khairan for joining us, akhi.
Wa yakum, jazakallah khairan for having me.
Barakallah
Appreciate
feek. Yes, sir. We've been looking forward to this because we are going to address certain issues that are seldom, if not rarely, if not never addressed, to be honest with you. A lot to be covered and a lot of benefits. We hope and pray Allah Azza wa Jal will facilitate for us to extract from this conversation. I will begin by giving the brother the opportunity to give us some background to the situation with the teenagers and the relevance for that for people living in the West. So the fundamental guests or the target audience will be our brothers and sisters who are living in the West. But we will see how this also will cascade eventually down to where we are, because it seems that it's just a matter of time before we will have to go through the same controversies and the same difficulties and the same challenges. So we could brace ourselves from now and be prepared, I guess, be ahead of the game. فتفضل حبيبي بارك الله فيك.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Peace be upon all of you. Jazakumullah khairan for having me, brother. So, I mean, those of you, if you don't know me, if you're not familiar with my channel, it's Abraham Education. My name is Michael Abraham, as the brother said. I'm a public school teacher in the United States. I also work in professional development in the public education system in the United States. I started as a teacher in Saudi, and brother Abu Mussab and I, we knew each other back in those days in Jeddah. I was there for 3 years. Unlike many brothers who went overseas to teach, I was there for 3 years, and I ended up coming back and becoming a public school teacher in the American education system.
What year was that where we were connected? What year was that?
It was 2010 to 2013. So I was working at
Andalus school, right? Yeah, we were both at Andalus school.
Correct. You know, brother Omar Schumacher, Chris, you know, he connected us. We made Hajj. The first fall I was there, alhamdulillah, through the Jeddah Dawah Association, we made Hajj together. And for me, that was the only time that I made Hajj. And inshallah, I don't know if you've probably done many times living there, but alhamdulillah, that was a great opportunity. The association provide. You know, me these days, I feel embarrassed to tell people that I made Hajj at no cost, because the Dawah Association provided that.
That's a great
the
blessing.
Dawah Association provided that opportunity at the time. Absolutely.
No.
You know, so I remember you from that trip. I remember you redirecting the Hujjaj when you would see them smoking, or you would see their belly button showing from the ihram. They didn't get past you at that. I recall those. But yeah, you know, alhamdulillah, for family reasons, I came back to the States. You know, so I'm in the state of Minnesota. I'm in the Twin Cities, in the city of Minneapolis. You know, we have a large Muslim community here. It is about 50% people from East Africa and from Somalia. I teach in the inner city in Minneapolis public schools. I teach in South Minneapolis. I teach in the neighborhood that was destroyed during all the rioting during 2010. I teach at a school that is over 90% Muslim kids. And in my education, both in KSA and here, I've been working with Muslim youth. So the situation of Muslim youth is something that's, I've devoted my attention to it quite a bit. And even while doing my academic credentials and degrees in universities here, getting my teaching license and master's degree, I focused all my research on the situations with Muslim youth. So, you know, there's high level and small level things going on with Muslim youth. And of course, we have a lot of anxiety in the community, a lot of panic about it, for good reason. But, you know, I'd also say that if we can learn certain things, if we can start doing certain things, I do think the potential to improve the situation, improve the Islamic practice of Muslim youth worldwide is available to us if we're willing to learn. You know, core to my work in public education, something you can easily identify, certainly in the West, the Muslim youth have a dilemma of being told in one area that Islam is the most important thing to them, being Muslim is the most important thing to them. They can't do this, they have to do that, and it's the most important thing. But as I've discussed with people, it's inevitable, and you will even read this from books that the ulama write about parenting. That the example you set for kids is what preeminates. And with anything you call someone to, whether it's a non-Muslim or your own child that you don't practice yourself, they're not likely going to take it. They're going to sense hypocrisy in it. So, our Muslim youth are experiencing that in a large way, in the sense that they're always told that Islam is very, very important in one sense. But then they are all constantly being put in contexts around people who control their environments who really are ignorant about Islam. And then they don't see models in the society of how you reconcile that situation. And what a major thing that the Muslim youth need from Muslims in America and in the West is an educational project that is designed to enhance the understanding of Islam in the society. And I'd like to know from Muslim leaders, or whatever we want to call them, that we have in the society, what exactly the plan for that is. Currently, who learns, and me personally, I feel frustrated. I think Muslims should feel frustrated at the extent to which we've been in the West, for the amount of time we've been in the West, the amount of time we've been interacting in the West, and the small level at which we've managed to authentically educate these societies about Islam. I think we should be frustrated with that personally. Now, when people learn about Islam in the West, who is it? It's usually people who have some sort of self-motivated interest. Inshallah, one group of that is people who are seeking out the truth about God themselves, and the sincere amongst those people, inshallah, they become Muslim, alhamdulillah. Other people, they might just have, a hobby type interest in religion, so they learn about Islam. Other people, maybe they hate Islam, so they find and learn about it. Other people have, you kind of have these liberal type Christians with interfaith type dialogue, that type of thing. They have somewhat of a political interest in learn about it. But how do you access people to educate them about Islam authentically, extensively, comprehensively, in terms of our needs as Muslims and in terms of what the religion actually is? How do you educate people who don't have that self-interest? And I really want people to understand that these educational institutions and these educational systems that our young Muslims are in the West, and oftentimes also in the Muslim world, international schools and things, where they are put in front of non-Muslim teachers. They're put in institutes that are administered by non-Muslims. Those professionals in those institutions, they have a motivation and an authentic interest to learn about Islam. And it's not a self-personal interest, or may not be, but it's a professional interest, because because anyone in education knows the better you know your students, the better you know their families that they come from, the better you understand them, the better you understand their cultural background, of which there is a huge emphasis in understanding that better in the field of education right now in the United States. Because the past 2 decades, especially the decade of 2000, 2010, was the largest decade of immigration in the United States history. Certainly the largest decade of Muslim immigration. So there's been this increasing diversity going on in the States, especially in metro areas, but even in small towns, where right before their eyes, teachers and principals, they've seen the demographics of their classrooms go through major shifts. And they obviously notice there's different things about these kids showing up in their classrooms now than there was the kids back in the 90s or 80s or whatever. So there is
professionally, it's in their interest to learn about Islam, so they can cater better for these students, and they could, it's for their professional career. That could be one major interest, right? This for the self-development.
100%. And the way the profession of teaching is structured in the United States, you get a teaching license granted by the state. It's usually good for 4, 5, 6 years maybe. And during that time, you have to do a certain amount of hours of continuing education credits in order to renew your license after it runs out. The areas in which you do that continuing education is line itemed by state law usually, or by policy of departments of education, of the areas in which you learn it. Pretty much every state in the United States requires that teachers do professional development regarding cultural background of students. And go ahead.
I'm sorry, I want to interrupt. A lot of our audience is from the UK. And obviously they're all over the place, but since your background and your discussion is primarily on the US, I will request the UK audience, or any audience from any other background, if there are points that are applicable, if some of the points that Brother Michael is covering are applicable to you, make that known to us via the comment section. So because there may be some points that are that it's not how the UK works, or Canada, or whatever, India or Malaysia. So depending on where you're from, if some of these points are relevant, it's good for us to know, so we can also customize our basically our conversation accordingly. And when some of these don't apply, so we can also think of alternatives. What could be the alternatives in your region, in your country, if this is not how the system is set up per se? Jazakallah khair. Go ahead.
Yeah, and there is cross relevance. I've had, actually, I've had a lot of my followers right now. They're from the UK, they're from Germany, Australia. I have people there. There is cross relevance. Of course,
Okay,
in a more globalized world, especially in the academic, there's cross pollination between the academic trends. In these places, America, I would say, is leading the charge of like what do you call the multiculturalist movements in education, this type of thing, though it goes way back. It's somewhat linked up with the racial equity movement, this type of thing. But there is these types of pressures in all places. Now the main point I'm getting to try to cross this bridge for Muslims, I put together a professional development training program in education called Engaging Muslim Students in Public Schools, which I also wrote into a book.
MashaAllah.
Yeah, and it's been a very
That was quick. I didn't get to see the.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I want to have a closer look. Engaging Muslim students in public schools.
If you search the title
it looks a little thick. How many pages is that?
It's almost 400.
MashaAllah, tabarakallah, barakallah feek.
Well, it's the training program. I started doing it in 2016. It was kind of the culmination of my postgraduate work with Hamline University in St. Paul, Minnesota. They supported me in doing it in the beginning. Then I partnered with Minneapolis Public Schools to do it with cohorts of teachers there. And then I began offering it privately in the state of Minnesota, as well as the state of Washington, a little bit in Ohio. I've now been doing it virtually online, and it's available through my website, abrahameducation.com, as a self-paced course. So I've had over 1,000 K through 12 educators do the program in the United States, across 12 states at this point. So, the reason I got on social media a year ago is to make Muslims aware of this work I'm doing and these resources that I've developed, because it really is a powerful tool for authentically educating really the whole society, but certainly people in our community and certainly non-Muslims who we're putting into relationships with our kids about Islam. And this is a key thing for the development of our children's Muslim identity, because our children need to see that people are insecure about teaching others about Islam. They're insecure about it. Sometimes there's good reason for that. Sometimes you don't want to make a mistake. Sometimes you want to teach authentically and this type of thing, and you don't fully trust yourself how. A big reason is, it is sort of against the codes of polite society in the Western world to bring up religion and bring up politics randomly or this type of stuff. Not that we relate our religion to politics, it's part of the problem. But, when that happens, when does Islam come up for people? It usually comes up springing out of some sort of conflict arising. It might be like a high level conflict, like there's something in the news that everyone starts talking about, and then they want to know what you think about that. Or that might be a small interpersonal conflict, like you're in your office, you get invited to the Christmas party, and you don't want to go to the Christmas party. This is a stressful thing on us, and it's counterproductive when the only opportunities we have and are partaking are these reactive opportunities to educate people about Islam. We have to show our children that we're being proactive to some degree in it. Now, I know from teaching, when you ask people to do something they're uncomfortable with, something they don't have confidence with, something they're not practiced or used to doing, you have to try to make it easy for them in the beginning. So that's why I put these resources together, both this book and this training, which are bona fide educational projects. These continuing education credits I'm talking about. Educators who take them in the States, they can get those. Their schools will issue for them. I've never had an issue with a school issuing for that, because all the justification for in educational research or why they should take this is established within the program, within the book. And because I have a postgraduate certification in education, it's usually a requirement they're looking for too. But we have to at least make our children. It's a powerful thing that people can do to they refer their principal of the child's school or their child's teacher to this book, to this training. Just let them know that let your kids know you're trying to make an effort to teach their teachers about Islam, teach the non-Muslims that are around about Islam. Parents can read the book themselves. Schools, a type of thing that schools in the States would love to do, and education is very politicized. Public education, there's all kinds of issues with it. Some of the biggest issues aren't what we talk about the most. I don't advise people to send their kid to public school. I say, homeschool, send your kid to an Islamic school if you can. But the reality is most Muslim parents aren't choosing to do that for a variety of reasons. Most Muslim parents aren't choosing to do that. And even if you do that in the States, you still belong to the community of your local school. And they still have to be responsive to you, and you're still a taxpayer to them. And if you're choosing not to send your kid to the school, those schools need to understand the reasons why. So this is a program that doesn't water down the religion at all. It teaches it authentically, but it teaches it relating it to the context of public schools that these kids are in, and to the psychological dilemmas that our youth go to, the type of how it's going to wreck kids' self-concept if they're not going to pray, the difficulty that kids have praying in school by not, the youth in America and in the West, Muslim youth, adolescents, especially if they're the children of immigrants, they are in a really unique situation in that they have all this pressure to do the prayer, of course, from the deen itself, from family, from the community, from all of us. We all want them to pray. They want to pray themselves. Then they're put in these places where the people who control the environment have zero idea about not only how to accommodate it, but also of the importance that it has to people, to Muslims, the psychological importance. Whereas their parents probably came from a place, if they came from the Muslim world, they came from a place where the prayer is entirely accommodated throughout the entire society. So the parents, then they can't even coach the kids how to do this type of self-advocacy that they would need to do to be able to pray. And they don't know how to coach the kids through the emotional trial of it. So there's great aid that is needed with this. And what schools might get these days is something from one of these organizations that we have where they get pamphlet type information. They might get something, how to accommodate Muslims. Oh, it will say practicing Muslims choose to pray. They might need 15 minutes a day to do it or whatever. Sometimes that type of stuff does more harm than it does good. Schools really need to be engaged on a deeper level, enter into a deeper level of education themselves. Because
I'm curious. I'm sorry. I'm curious. So can you give us a sample or an example of how the book addresses this particular issue? Obviously, a summarized version. How does the book go about educating the educators about the prayer on campus or in school premises?
So the first chapter of the book is about research in public education that justifies the rest of the book, basically, because that's kind of standard practice and how you do it in the field. The second chapter is it's like a brief history of the history of Muslims in America, which contextualizes the diversity of the Muslim population for teachers in the States, which is a better way to teach it than teaching about it being diversity in religion, because Muslims are actually more unified on the religion than they are in their ethnic background. Now, the third chapter goes through the beliefs of the religion, and the fourth chapter goes through the technicalities of following it in great detail. The third chapter is essentially an extended walk through the Hadith of Jibril that goes over the 5 pillars and goes over the tenets of Iman. And with each one, I relate it to specific issues that I know to have come up in public schools from teachers and things I've seen myself and even research, this type of thing. I start off by talking about how Islam is sourced on its texts, which is a really important thing for people in the West to understand about Islam and for our youth to understand, because it's something that differentiates the religious understanding of Muslims from the standard understanding of religion in the Western world, because the Western world's all in this just religion is subjective type of thing. But that's a whole thing with talking to people about Islam. You have to establish at the outset that Islam is not something that I decide. It's not something that you decide. It's not something that anyone can decide. It's something that of course, the Quran, the speech of Allah, and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ decide. And that is preserved through its texts. So after establishing that, I teach the religion through verses of the Quran and Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So when talking about prayer, a really important Hadith to show educators that I show in the book and I show in my training is the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he talks about, and I'm not the best at memorizing the exact wording of hadith. This is why when I teach people about Islam, and I'm not a student of knowledge, but I put it in a structured format first, like the book or presentation. And, and through doing this, I'm able to attain a captive audience, which to listen extensively, which is an important thing. But the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he says the first thing that the slave will be asked about on the day of judgment is the salah. And if it is sound, he is successful. And if it is not sound, he's failed. And then I explain how in Islam, it's part of Islamic belief, not just that non-Muslims will go to hellfire, but even a Muslim can go to hellfire for a time and be punished for expiation for sins that they're not forgiven for before being granted into paradise. Because sometimes non-Muslims with their background, especially if they're Protestant Christian, their conception of religion is, well, if you believe what you believe, then you're going to be forgiven no matter what, this type of thing. So there's those types of differences you need to iron out for people. But what that hadith shows is some of the psychological weight that praying puts on Muslims and puts on Muslim children. So when you explain it leading up to that point, that psychological burden of what you could go through if you don't pray and how it can affect your self-concept, then it hits people very hard. I've had principals in my training cry when I show them that hadith for realizing what they were doing for kids for years and not taking this thing seriously and not accommodating it. So
I was just thinking. Sorry to interrupt you. I was just thinking. I could only imagine the recipient of this information who's not Muslim, how much da'wah is actually being given to them in the context of trying to educate them on how to deal with Muslims. Actually, they're the main beneficiary by getting the core message of Islam, perhaps in such a direct and indirect way simultaneously. It's intriguing. It's intriguing that alhamdulillah.
And look, your average public school educator, like as I was saying before, honestly, they're not someone who's likely to accept Islam if you look at them in kind of a psychological, sociological aspect. Now, of course, that's all up to Allah's decree. But they're not someone, the average age of an educator in the States is 45. They're usually someone who's settled in their life. They're usually someone who's married. They have established life. And I mean, you know how it is. You can educate about a lot of people about Islam very thoroughly. They'll even think it's the truth sometimes, but they won't accept it just because their life is too comfortable or this type of thing. So I mean, I don't educate people on that basis, but I educate it on the basis of they have an authentic professional interest to learn about this. Now, because it's just an authentic professional interest, no need to sugarcoat things. No, we're all professionals. We can handle what the truth is, and they appreciate it greatly. And educators, they are usually people who have a sense of wanting to be worldly to some degree. They want to be educated. Honestly, someone in the Western world who's ignorant about Islam, the quickest, the most efficient way for them to learn more about cultures of the world in general is to learn about Islam, because it forms the basis of so many cultures. So it's highly appreciated. And people can go to abrahameducation.com, go to the testimonials tab, and see what educators say about the training. They highly appreciate it. And those testimonials are what draw people to it. So, going back to how I present it, like both in the training and in the book, I separate the sections of talking about the technicalities of what you need to do to perform the act. And then before that, talking about the belief. So in the belief section, people really get a feel for, again, the emotional weight of these things. Because otherwise they'll just think of it as like, oh, this person chooses to do it, they choose not to do it, and they won't understand the internal dilemmas that people are going through. Now with accommodating it, having worked in schools, people really don't quite appreciate the extent of detail that people need to understand about the salah in order to be able to actually accommodate it. It's not just a matter of saying to kids, go here for 15 minutes and go do it. There's a lot more to it.
There's a lot more to it. Yeah, there's a lot of preparation.
Absolutely. Just a classic example, like a school might, this happens a lot. Schools might know that kids need to pray or whatever. They're going to say, okay, go to the library for 15 minutes or whatever. And the kid says, teacher, I'm going to go pray. They said, okay. The admin said you are able to do that. So go. The kid leaves. The library is this way, but he walks out of the room this way. And the teacher says, hey, where are you going? This type of thing. All right. And a lot of times, our teenagers, the thing is too, people in the school, for them to do it successfully, they have to supervise it. They have to have adults supervising them to do it. Of course, in the book I talk about how males shouldn't supervise females and this type of thing. But teenagers, they're really just too impulsive that when they get free time, they're likely to do something, they're likely to do something else with it. And then when they create a disruption, when they're given the accommodation and the accommodation is not set up well, what the legal counsel of the school will tell the school is, well, if they're creating a disruption, you can actually take it away. And that is what case law says in the United States, that they have a bona fide right under the First Amendment to do to pray. But if they create an academic disruption with it and don't use it, then it actually can be taken away. But the thing is, the schools are not setting the kids up to be successful with it because they don't know how to accommodate it. There's all kinds of details involved in it, down to things like the bathrooms in the West are usually not set up to accommodate making wudu very well. Never mind that a lot of the teachers and people in the school just don't even know what wudu is. So the kids, the water will spray all over and it makes a mess, and then they're mad about that. Wudu actually a lot of times takes longer than the prayer. Sometimes they'll give them a room to pray, but the room will be all full of tables and chairs. They don't have an open floor space to do it. There will be pictures of faces hanging on the wall, all this type of stuff. So they're just like the room for so much conflict to come up happens all the time. So there needs to be thorough education for schools to really do this, and they need an appreciation of, again, the psychological weight that the prayer has on us in order to have an appreciation themselves to be patient with the kids when they go through this, when they're trying to accommodate them.
Yeah, subhanAllah. As Iman's homeschool, one of our sisters, may Allah bless her, she, even in their case, the bathrooms are mixed. And very often in some schools, the bathrooms are mixed. So that's a whole other challenge for the sister to be able to make wudu in a bathroom when a man may be entering, or even, as you mentioned, even if it's the same gender. Perhaps, now that I'm thinking about it, some of this awareness needs to cascade down to the students. Maybe 100%. Maybe after the instructors and the teachers absorb this information, then somehow, some way, this awareness is created on a higher level, so that it becomes known to other people how to react adequately to seeing a Muslim pray. Because sometimes I've done that in the past. I'll be in the airport, I'm on a time budget, and time of Salah is about to go out. I just landed in X country, and I don't have time till I leave. I want to praying in the airport. And you see people walking around, you're looking at you like, what's going on here? Is this, they're just glaring at you, or they think something's wrong with you, or somebody might walk in front of you or something like that. So you would think that also if they see the Muslims praying in the library or somewhere, they might think that something's wrong with them.
Look, this is where the public education system is really important, because the public education ends up setting the agenda of the professional world for the next generation. So by educating the public education system, it can become a standard thing in these schools, that even the non-Muslim children will see that, oh, you are in an environment with Muslims, you have X, Y, and Z to accommodate, and you know about this, this, and that. Another thing that my training and book do, I offer resources K through 12 that are suitable for the public education curriculum, that can be used to show what authentic Islamic practice looks like. So whole classes can learn about that, and you can have opportunities for the Muslim kids to be set up well to explain those types of things to classmates, or even learn about themselves. But that's a whole big thing. The professional world is downstream from the education system. Even like the heavy focus that we've had on race recently in the United States, and you see all these corporations, doing these equity trainings and changing the way they talk about race and all that type of stuff. All of that was seeded in the education system 2 decades ago. All of that type of stuff was being done in schools beginning 25 years ago, through consultancy groups and through trainings, some specific ones in particular that became very huge, really influenced the public education system. Now you've had young people who've gone through the education system and received that type of education and learned that type of stuff. So now when they are in these professional worlds, they have a new understanding of how you interact with diversity or whatever you want to call it, and that type of stuff. And you see corporations now playing that type of thing out. And a lot of those consultancy agencies that were first in the education system, they actually moved on to the corporate world after thoroughly educating the education system and stuff. So so the whole thing I say, Muslims, we're all, obviously the mainstream media, we're never going to be able to educate people about Islam through that. And that's just a reactionary thing in general. There's a big need to be on social media and on these platforms and doing this, but even that, the algorithms will always limit things. So how do we get across echo chambers and get across social communities to educate people over the long term authentically about Islam and the society? The public education system is the place that we have to go. And we have untapped leverage in those places because the Muslim community is a young community, both in the United States and worldwide. In the United States, the average age of a person, I believe, is 39 years old. The average age of a Muslim, I think, is 23. It might be like 28, but it's certainly in the 20s. And, that's the whole thing, too, where we have Muslim communities in the United States, which is most metro areas. The schools actually feel the presence of the Muslim community more than those metro areas in general, because most of the community is K through 12 people. Now, schools have pressure from all over the place. And sometimes people outside the United States don't quite understand how susceptible to influence the United States education system is, because at bottom, it's not a top-down structure. It's a local first structure. So you can influence your school and what they do. And schools have so much pressure to be responsive to families these days. And really, like, school choice is enough in the United States now that schools are in a competition for kids. And there's a dollar amount that you'll get from the state and property taxes for each kid that comes to the school. So they don't want to displease families. So because we have so many of these kids in these schools, it's actually an untapped resource, an untapped place of leverage that we haven't used. And the kids need to see us using it. Otherwise, the things that we tell them privately about the importance of Islam, it just goes in one ear and out the other. Or we end up looking hypocritical to them because we're not making any effort outside themselves to educate people, and especially in the environments that they are in.
Yeah, obviously, I want to use this opportunity to remind our brothers and sisters in terms of priorities. A lot of the stuff that we're discussing is mostly applicable and relevant to those who are in a predicament where they don't have really many alternatives. Ideally, we would always recommend, if you're able to live in a Muslim environment, Muslim country where you're free from all of these pressures and all of these issues, then wa ni'ma billah, go ahead and ride on that wave. If that is too difficult, because it's not feasible for everybody, it's not an option for everybody due to economic, due to social, due to personal, whatever the reasons may be, then of course we're all here promoters of homeschooling and protecting to the best of our ability the environment in which our children are being taught and educated and so on and so forth. If that fails, or if that's not feasible, that's not doable, there aren't any resources, the mother's incapable, the father's working, whatever, this is when we are in a predicament where we're facing this situation. The kids are going there, and so either you're trying to minimize the damage, and also you're trying to have an impact on whatever culture or whatever country you live in, so that Islam becomes recognized, and the pillars of Islam and the aspects of Islam, the rituals within Islam are respected, they're maintained. And so because at the end of the day, no matter how hard you try, they will remain those Muslim communities in those Western countries, and you want to pave the way for them to be able to practice their religion without any harassment, without that making it difficult for them to continue. Not that this is what you want to opt for, but you could work in parallel. Meaning, even if you want to leave eventually, whatever your situation may be, if you're able to deliver this information or this program to those people, then you're doing a service, and you're doing a favor for those Muslims and for the generations to come. Because at the end of the day, reality wise, what is the percentage of Muslims? Do you have numbers in terms, statistically speaking, like the demographics? What is the percentage of Muslims?
The standard number you'll hear is 1% of the American population, which is a little under 4 million. However, based on mosque surveying that is done, that's tracked attendance at mosques countrywide, that stuff pretty much confirms it's a lot larger than that. It's probably more like 8 or 9 million people, and you're probably talking about 5 to 6 million young people. And what you're saying, I mean, the social media era in the last decade, inshallah, by Allah's will, this next decade I think will be different. It shocked the Muslims. It created a lot of dilemmas that were hard for parents to deal with in this type of thing, But 10, 15 years ago, let's say, I feel like it used to be known that if you were a Muslim living in the West, you have to be doing da'wah. If you as part of to be doing that, is that not correct?
Yeah, I would say so. Maybe even longer. Back in my experience when I lived there, surely da'wah was part and parcel of your existence.
Correct. So keeping kids upon Islam, they have to see us actually doing that. They have to see their parents actually doing that. If you're going to be living in the West, especially, otherwise what you tell them to stay away from and do in Islam, there's a good chance that they will come to feel that that's hypocritical of you, or they will feel that, you're just like some isolated individual from the society. You don't really get what's going on, and they'll rationalize everything that you're telling them away. It's very likely to happen, especially when they get into later adolescence.
I want to show this message here from our sister Purely. Says in my public high school in Canada, aka Canada, there are many Muslims. We have a prayer room, and teachers never ask questions. When we need to pray, we just sign out and leave class for how long we need. Alhamdulillah, that's next level right there. MashaAllah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, so, sister, that's not the case. I believe in the UK, as per the other sister Iman's homeschool. It's not the case, obviously, in the States. It's a little more complicated.
These things are place by place. A lot of it will depend. A lot of it depends on work that families in those communities themselves have done. There's been a lot of situations where they've tried, and the thing too is even accommodations like that can be the experience that one group of students has for a few years when they go through high school or whatever, and maybe that group of students is cooperative with it and they're responsible with it. But then the next 4 years, you might get a different group of students who isn't the same way without it, and then the school will chuck it. That type of thing happens too.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just a principle. I guess the school principal has a big factor in all of this. There are things that they can decide on a school level. It doesn't have to be related to the other schools. So there might be a school principal that is accommodating, that is kind, that is broad-minded, and you will find another one who might be anti-Islam and goes out of his way to make it difficult for them. Subhanallah.
And I have a bit of the impression that that's a little less likely in North America than maybe it is in the UK. Like, I would say your average school administrator, especially in a metro area in North America, their main sensitivity, they're not going to want to be called a racist. That is the main thing that they're going to be worried about.
Right.
So most of them, they're going to be pretty open to learning and wanting to show that they're accommodating, at the least in a superficial way.
Oh, subhanAllah, look at this one. I mean, it's a crazy world we're living in. Here we have, unfortunately, in the UK, they give to kids or Muslims prayer rooms, and because it's not being used, it's taken away.
Yeah.
So,
and that's happened in schools in the States. But look, part of what that is founded on, when you put Muslim teenagers in an environment that's controlled by non-Muslims, if Muslims are controlling it, they're going to lead the kids there. They're going to understand the importance of it. It's always going to, unless you teach the people controlling that environment about the seriousness of this and about the psychological weight and burden that it has on students and families if it's not done. Unless you teach about that, then the people controlling the environment themselves, they're not going to prioritize it and emphasize and appreciate it. And they won't be, and they won't accommodate the kids effectively. And then the path of least resistance becomes for the kids to not do it.
Here's what I've realized over the years. Subhanallah, what I've realized is if you if you make an effort, you will be surprised with the results that you're able to achieve. And if you're passive, then you just miss out. I guess maybe the biggest culprits in all this are the parents, unfortunately. When the child expresses their interest in praying in school, I know from the questions I get on regular basis, there are parents who will verbalize something like, "Don't worry about it. You're excused. You have, you're in school. Don't make a big fuss. When you come home, combine Dhuhr with Asr, or just do a qada, make up your prayer later." And so they give that impression. They give the impression to the kids that it is not a big deal, and it isn't important.
And
then,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. And
Well,
I guess for the child, they might be disappointed in the beginning, but just the way the shaitan works with humans, eventually they're gonna be like, all right, great. My parents told me that this is not a big deal. It's not a priority. I need to work on my, fix and focus on my education. Right. And then they become negligent of something that otherwise they would have maintained had the parents shown that same drive. Had the parents shown them like, oh, this is a big deal. This is your right. It's your salah. Before you give up, let's talk to the school. Let's pick up the phone and speak to the principal. I had similar situations with Friday prayer.
Yep.
People always think it's Friday is a working day and you can't. And I remember back in the States, I spoke with the management. I said, yo, I want to go. This is my thing. I want to go pray Friday, and I can come Saturday morning, or I could work an extra 2 hours. I was able to negotiate with them, and more often than not, in fact, every single job, I think, I managed to be able to be given some time and allowed to go pray Jumu'ah, simply because I made an effort. I put my trust in Allah, and I followed the means Allah made available. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants success to whomever He wills. I'm not saying that everybody's going to get the same result, and I'm not saying that I was special about it. Not at all. All I'm saying is, if you make an effort, at least you know that you've done your utmost. Now, whether it materializes or not, that's beyond us and besides the point. But don't give up immediately and surrender before you actually try to make an effort at a level of the education. What should we call it? The school board of members, the instructors, the school principal. Maybe sometimes you can refer this to a lawyer, where you could enforce certain rights that the country supposedly provides in terms of freedom of religion and freedom of whatever. This could fall under your constitutional right to practice the religion that you want to follow.
And I just want to say that that type of rationalizing that you're talking about, where the parent will say, "Oh, you're excused," or "Oh, you can combine it later," that type of thing. That type of rationalization happens a lot, and something that people need to understand about the way kids think and the way, especially adolescents, will rationalize as they get older. They will take the concept that you have taught them there, which is what is obliged doesn't really matter. You can just compromise on it. That's what you've taught them. And then they will extrapolate that to everything else. So then when they're 18, 19, and you see them making TikToks and you see them posted on Instagram, whatever, and you don't like, and all of a sudden that's like an embarrassing thing for you, then you're upset about that. But they got the lesson that they could compromise there or doing that when you taught them that praying was something they could compromise on. Because the way they will rationalize is they will extrapolate it to other things. And this is where it gets down to how parenting and nurturing kids is an action speak louder than words thing. I will tell you, for those parents, in my opinion, even if you are too afraid to tell the school that and to try to advocate for your kid like that, it is better you tell your kid that you're afraid to do that because you're weak, as opposed to telling them something that is false about the deen.
Exactly,
and to giving them the wrong idea about what the obligations are. Now, at the same time, I don't like to shame parents. I understand people's dilemmas, and that's why I put this stuff together, because the type of advocacy, it's hard. and there's emotional burden that comes with it. People don't feel confident in it. So being able to refer them to resources that do this type of work well and comprehensively and are established in the field of education, it's a real opportunity for parents, because then you can at least say to your kid that you've referred the school to these things, and it will teach them about this and that. And actually, after you've done that, what you're saying about the legal rights, certainly in the United States, because the praying school is something kids have a legal right to do, especially if the families made an attempt to educate the school on these things thoroughly, that increases your leverage for having a legal argument against them, this type of thing.
Yeah, a lot of these rights are not sought after, I believe. People are just not familiar with the law. They're not familiar with their rights, and therefore they suffer, and their children suffer, and their Islamic identity is highly compromised. Absolutely. Because of lack of awareness about what you can and you cannot do, and what rights you have in any given country. And each country has its own set of rules and laws, but you'll be surprised about what the law actually allows that you just might not be familiar with. I guess it's just we have to be more diligent wherever we may be, each in his respective country. You have to be diligent in seeking such information, meaning there has to be this concern, this burning desire to have the Islamic identity firm and recognized by outsiders. People should be able to know that these kids are Muslim because of all of the aspects of Islam that could appear on them externally. For the sisters, obviously the biggest giveaway is her dress code. Her hijab, her covering herself. That's just a giveaway. For the brothers, they have a different set of rules depending on their age and so on and so forth. But the fact that there's a lot of Muslims who are ashamed of their Islam, to the point that they either completely hide it, in a time where other communities of vile nature are literally in everybody's face, trying to establish for themselves recognition and certain rights that we would argue they're definitely not entitled to. But look at the irony that individuals that we would label as completely deviant and astray are making a case for themselves and they're getting a lot of they're seeped into the educational system, and we all know the details of that.
Correct.
But here's the Muslim shying away from being allowed or for asking to pray or to practice their religion, or that their rights are maintained and respected. It's really it's disappointing. It's devastating. The level that we have reached.
Yep. And again, when you send the message with your actions to kids that, our Islam, it's just subject to what everyone else is doing, or we have to make it subject to everyone else's agenda, or we have to make it subject to everyone else's comfort level, or with this type of thing. Again, you might first apply that with something like praying or whatever, but they will extrapolate that into every other area. And, a lot of our Muslims who have grown up in the West and they're young adults now, a lot of them have imbibed that, that's kind of how you do it as a Muslim in the West or whatever, like they're almost like impressed with themselves at how good they are at compromising away. You get what I'm saying? But, I don't like to blame them directly because they weren't shown anything better. The situations are very difficult for immigrant parents. Me, even living in Saudi, I've had the experience of it. It's very difficult to uproot and supplant in a different society that is different from the one you grow up in and be trying to navigate so much. So the young Muslims need to understand that their parents have had it very difficult. We need to acknowledge that, and they have. But, we have to learn from those difficulties. We have to ask ourselves what we can do to make it better. That whole talk connects to the way that parents interact with their kids and this type of thing. And I appreciate you giving me this time and sharing the work that I'm trying to do and to share my channel. And, there's maybe not enough time to talk about it here, but I do want people to be aware that I'm going to be doing a course for parents on my YouTube channel this summer. Because in my years of education, I've learned a lot about interacting with kids. And Again, it's a challenge. It's a challenge, especially for immigrant parents, but for anyone, and parenting is something that you get into that you might not have experience with kids when you get into it. And if you kind of just wing it, or you just go through what you want to do intuitively, there is a lot of mistakes that you can make. And, surviving in education, especially in an urban school district like I have, you can't, actually every society on earth is going through a dilemma where traditionally, I mean, at least in the recent past, they've relied on coercive measures to get kids to behave the way they want them to do. Coercive measures that depend on operating on your own stress reactions when kids annoy you. And kids are annoying. They do annoy adults. So those are things like yelling, screaming, threatening, hitting, this type of thing. And I'm not saying, there can be a place for the application of those things sometimes in parenting. I'm not saying there isn't. But, here in the West, like around maybe the 1960s, 1970s, the baby boom generation, they started to recognize that didn't feel very good and they want something to do it. And actually in the West, they're even more extreme about those types of things in the past than Muslim societies were. So, I mean, those things aren't allowed in education in the West for the most part anymore. Even in most Muslim countries, they've like banned hitting and that type of thing. But, what's cropped up instead mostly is spoiling kids on the other end. And this is a whole problem that Muslim kids in the West will face going through the public education system, because you can't use punitive measures to threaten kids much anymore. What schools do is the opposite, by like using rewards or rewarding them with tickets or point charts or candies or this type of thing. And, neither one of those methods of raising a kid nurtures internal motivation in a child. So, a thing that I have focused on, in urban schools, you have enough challenges with kids that really neither one of those things will work or hold very more. So you really have to learn how to be a good leader of young people when you work in an urban school, and how to approach them and talk to them and teach them in a way that they're going to respect you enough to want to stay in your classroom and be self-motivated to do so. And a lot of these things are things that directly apply to good parenting. And good parenting that will raise a child to being self-motivated. And all these things I learned in education, I want to transfer this stuff to Muslim parents, more so to younger people who want to be parents or they're young parents themselves, because they will actually benefit the most. The older people, harder to change. And people who come from, who did not grow up in the West and this type of thing, yes, it's hard to break old habits and that type of stuff, though there's still things to learn. This is another thing I want to draw to people's attention to.
Jazakallah khair. Again, for those of you who are not familiar with what's going on here, Brother Michael has been a regular guest on our One Way to Tarbiyah channel, on our One Way to Tarbiyah platform. We've hosted him, and we were honored to have him as a speaker and educator on the matter of parenting on multiple occasions. Those who are subscribed to the One Way to Tarbiyah package, if I may say, are familiar with those lectures and classes that were given. And we are basically now trying to reach out to the bigger audience, so that we're not limiting this to the One Way to Tarbiyah crowd, taking into consideration that it's not the biggest crowd in the world. We're trying to reach out to others because we see the need for this message to go out. I know some of you are hypersensitive about guests and who we bring on and who we don't bring on. You see a brother with a beard, and some of you are, mashallah, unfortunately not whatever enough to ask the proper questions or to be more accommodating. Brother Michael does not claim to be a sheikh and trying to educate you on the matters of Islam. Rather, his objective and he's serving an educational purpose from an Islamic paradigm, and you don't have to be Sheikh Albani rahimahullah in order to do that. We all play a part and role in communicating this message to the larger audience, and each in his own field. The brother knows things about education, about parenting that I don't know and I will never know, and that actually I've heard so many of his lessons that I failed in implementing. And every time he speaks about parents yelling and hitting, I think he's taking a swipe at Lebanese people. But These are realities. So
but everyone thinks that about their culture.
Yeah, I know, I know.
Even white Americans have these issues, and I just say that because so many Muslims have this inferiority complex about themselves. And everyone thinks that type of thing is something particular to their culture when it's not. It's extremely universal.
Yeah, it's a broad thing. It's a broader thing. Jazakallah khair. So I mean, we understand that. So this is the objective here. This is the core message. Some kids are going to these public schools or various types of schools. Islam is being marginalized and sidelined and looked down upon, and people are not speaking out about their basic right. They're not going to give an Aqidah class on Allah's names and attributes in the school. We just want these kids to be able to go, have proper wudu, and pray, and be proud of keeping their Muslim identity, and during times where everybody's proud about everything else except except Islam, which is really mind blowing. Yep. So this is what this whole thing is about, so that you don't get it twisted and you don't freak out and you don't panic and you don't get confused. And this is how our religion works. There's a lot that needs to be covered. I think it's only fair that we open the floor if in case anybody has any particular question. Unless you want to add anything, Akhi. If you're not adding anything, I can open the floor for some questions and see what we could, if we get anything interesting here. I know I've tried to share the most relevant comments. We do have a question from brother. I don't know if it's a brother or sister.
Any questions about kids? I'm happy to answer.
As best I can. Yeah, I have a lot of questions for you about kids. How soon can we kick him out of the house? No, I'm just kidding. So here we have Waqar said, how should we as Muslim men who want to make hijrah for Allah and His Messenger in order to flee with their deen, selves and property do so? Well, allow me to answer that one, Brother Michael. This Habibi, preparation is and reliance upon Allah. So first of all, if you have the intention to make hijrah and you're sincere, more often than not, it gets facilitated, because Allah Azza wa Jal promised in the Quran, وَمَن يُهَاجِرْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ يَجِدْ فِي الْأَرْضِ مُرَاغَمًا كَثِيرَةً وَسَعًا. And whosoever migrates in the cause of Allah will find in the land, and wherever they go, plenty, abundance of khair, of good and vastness. So a lot of times when people truly make the proper, it's not just wishful thinking, they truly make an effort to reside in a Muslim oriented country, because again, where are you going to go where Islam is full-fledged, the law and the Sharia is being implemented? We have very limited options. But some countries, they have a larger Muslim population where you're within your own people. You know what I'm saying? Masajid are everywhere. You hear the adhan, you go pray. You don't feel that you're an outsider trying to practice religion in another country. So you make that effort, and that may require that you get certain education that you don't have. Maybe the requirements is that you have a master's in a particular field, and you don't have the master's. Maybe that's what's on you to do. Maybe you need to change your career because the demand is for example, English language instructors, and you don't teach English. But that's usually a very good window for those who want to go to a Muslim country by going there and teaching English as a second language or a foreign language to the local people. And the list goes on. Whatever it may be, there's things that you have to do, sacrifices you have to make to achieve that. Let's assume Allah did not have it decreed for you, because we don't know. You could make all the efforts, follow all the means Allah made available, but it wasn't written for you. Then you will gain two things out of this. Number one, you feel at ease when you stand before Allah on Yawm al-Qiyamah that you tried your utmost best. You did your best to make it happen. Number two, you would hope that Allah Azza wa Jalla will protect you in whichever environment you're in, because you've made the effort, and had it been up to you, you would have left for a better environment. But that wasn't the case, and so you would hope and pray that you'll be protected and Allah will facilitate your affairs, because there's that genuine need, that genuine desire to migrate for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. that's just a blueprint or general generic answer to many individuals who go through this dilemma of how do I go about it. You have to do your best, but it doesn't always work out. Yet there are plenty of opportunities, and sometimes your migration is temporary, meaning you go there with the intention to stay forever, but it doesn't work out because you're a foreigner. You have a visa, it will expire. You have a job, you might lose it. And so you always have to be ready to either go to another place or even return to where you came from. But during that time, there are obviously a lot of blessings and a lot of opportunities and a lot of khair that you may acquire and being in a more friendlier environment to Islam and Muslims than the one that you're currently in. Now, Allahu Alam. All right, let's see here. My son, right here. My son is 9. Please advise, how should I teach him to defend himself when other kids hit him? How should he respond? Karate black belt. No, go ahead. Go ahead there, brother Michael. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, first of all, if this is happening at school and it's physical bullying where the kid has not instigated it, it's something that should be reported, and there should be punitive measures brought against the kids who do it. I mean, that's standard in any other school with physical bullying. That's that in almost any school, that's a suspension worthy thing. So if the kid doesn't want that brought to the school's attention because he's afraid of getting in more trouble with the bullies or whatever, that you should bypass that concern. With bullying in general, with verbal bullying, if there's bullying leading up to it, a known way to diffuse and get rid of verbal bullying is for the child to be trained to not give a reaction to it, or to not show that they are emotionally affected by it. Now, if you're in the West, if you're in America, there should be a school psychologist either in the school or within the school districts who can do this type of training to the kid. Because with verbal bullying, the motivation of the bully is always to get a reaction and to get attention from the person they're bullying. And it doesn't matter if the attention is positive, negative, a threatening response, giving the bullying back, whatever. It doesn't matter what the reaction is. They're just seeking out a reaction due to their own emotional needs. So, so training the child to not give a reaction, which first and foremost actually involves their facial expression and their body language, and how to hold a neutral facial expression that shows they're emotionally unaffected. And then there can maybe be some responses you can give where you can teach the kid to just be like, okay, or this type of thing to show that they don't care. Usually a part of that is you have to talk the kid into understanding why this verbal bullying they're experiencing isn't something that is true, whatever kids are saying to them, and it's not something that they should take seriously. And you have to make kids, this is actually a big part of navigating kids through school when they go to these schools, is making them understand that what motivates other kids doesn't have anything to do with them. It has to do with kids trying to act out on their own emotional needs. But, this is one of the challenges of schools, because the kids who in these schools who end up having the most social influence, there are oftentimes the kids who have the most emotional damage to them done in their own backgrounds. And then they are taking it out on other kids and this type of thing.
But see, in this case, it's
part of why you should homeschool.
Yeah. But this is not verbal bullying. This is physical bullying.
Yeah, it is. I know. I mean, what I'm saying is, if it's sometimes physical bullying is preceded by verbal bullying, however, though, that's very common. And if it can be diffused at that point, that is good and something that the kid can do. But if it's constant physical bullying, I mean, this needs to be reported to the institution, and disciplinary measures, punitive measures, need to be brought upon the instigator.
Yeah. Okay. By the way,
and look, my email is info@abrahameducation.com, and sometimes Muslim parents have these real issues. If you're not sure about how to communicate with your school, you don't know how to craft an email to stick up for yourself or this type of thing, please email me. I'd be happy to email your school for you or draft an email for you after talking about the situation that we can resolve that. And I offer that type of consultation to Muslims for free.
Speaking of which, there's been frequent requests to put a link to the book. Some sister
Griffin, I don't know how I can send to you, but just search "Engaging Muslim Students in Public Schools" on Amazon.
Okay. Do you have the comments appearing in front of you on the right side?
Oh, the comments. I see. Oh, look at that. I'm not sure I can put anything in the comments. I can put
Give it
something
a shot.
I can put something in the private chat.
Oh, okay. Let me see. If I get it, I'll post it. Anyways, we would leave it in the description. We would leave the brother's email and also the link for the book in the description, inshallah ta'ala. So don't worry if you don't have it now.
I put it in the private chat, Wajdi.
Yeah. Okay, this is the book. Copy, paste.
My website in there too. That's where people can access the training or K-12.
And we would also want your email, sir, since you offered the email. Meanwhile, I'm going to scroll up here because I saw a question by Fufuz. السلام عليكم أستاذ بارك الله فيك وعليكم السلام فوفوز وفيك بارك الله تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير يا فوفوز really brother that's like
you take that one please.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, I'm not taking that one either because this is neither our tafsir class nor our aqidah ya fufuz. No, not any kind of question will be allowed. We will entertain those questions during our dedicated classes. Barakallah feek. I didn't even read the question. I just posted it. Okay, so we're done with the bullying. Blue blanket said, what is this about? It's about a lot of stuff. Type how to deal with kids right here. How to deal with kids who hit like slapping and kicking. I was babysitting a few times and I think I could have handled the situation better. We're assuming that you kicked them and slapped them back and now you're regretting what you had done. No. Here we go. So what do you think, Akhi?
Look, one of the first things I'm going to go into in the course is how you deal with kids in tense situations or how you deal with them in situations that tend to get tense. And how you de-escalate the tension of the situations. Now, kids and a lot of that stuff comes down to nonverbal communication. Comes down to things with your body language, comes down to things with facial expression, comes down to things with your tone of voice. And, honestly, if I could summarize the overarching advice that people need when dealing with kids is you have to be calm with them. Even when they're getting worked up, if you get more worked up, they are going to get more worked up and it's going to build up. So, when kids are being physical, I mean, it depends on their age a little bit. I teach in a high school. When two kids start fighting in a high school, this is a sister and a female staff sees it. They run and find a male staff to ask him to get in the middle of it.
Oh,
if it's prepubescent kids, we're talking about kids under 11, 9, 8, you can step into the middle of it calmly and get in between them. But you want to be calm when you do it. And you don't want to yell over them, which is a hard thing for people to understand. Yeah. The first thing with kids, and I'll go into this more detail in the course because it needs to be hashed out like in its own lessons. But the first thing that people need to understand with these types of situations is you have to stay calm yourself. Calmness is control with kids. Calmness establishes authority with kids. Getting all worked up and operating on your own stress reactions, that makes kids feel that you're not in control of the situation. And that breaks down their trust and their willingness to buy into your authority. There's a baseline rule with kids.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. Hussein Tazim, how to deal with school curriculum that teaches haram, such as theory of evolution, Shakespeare, which is part of English 10 BC, etc. Okay, well, there's the answer for you right there in your face, my brother. Engaging Muslim students in public schools is how, because that educates them, right?
Correct. This is the thing. Okay, these types of conundrums, it takes an educational project to begin unraveling these things. That is why this exact stuff that is being talked about in this question, I go into this in detail in the book. There is things that public school teachers need to understand about the way Muslims view the world and the way these things are going to be perceived. Something like Shakespeare and anything that has to do with romance or love and certainly sex education. It should be standard in these schools that they hold educational workshops and seminars themselves where they make very clear and apparent to families what they're going to be teaching in those things, especially if they have Muslim families. And I emphasize that in the book and they need to understand why. Both the book and the training, they go over these things. So that is the start of how you're being educated. Now, as far as your kids, your kids already in this, they're going to be in these classes. They come home every day. Look, at bottom, you have to understand, I mean, each one of these things, Here's what I hope to get to, because I'm going to start the parenting course on June 11th. It's going to be live streamed. I have some predefined things I'm going to teach. I'll probably just do it on a consistent basis and keep talking about these things. You have to have defined time at home where you can talk to your kids and they're going to listen. Dinner time is a great time for that. Sometimes after the prayer can work for that. If they're younger, especially, reading time together is great for that. Whether your kids go to school or not, whether you homeschool them or you send them to public schools, you have to take charge of your kids' education. And yes, if your kids go to public school, you have to do like a daily recalibration with them on everything that's going on in there. And the bigger concerns are things socially with other kids, even more so than the school curriculum. Another thing I will go into the course is how you talk to kids in a way that is going to elicit from them information about what goes on in school, and how you ease them into a comfort zone where they feel comfortable talking about that at school, and how you build them up to do that. There's method, and there's a lot of things you need to know about to do that. That's another skill I'll go over in the parenting course.
Beautiful. Jazakallah khair. I think we have a couple of questions left. We are well above the hour, 10-minute mark. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. Assalamu alaikum. How to deal with your own child bullying their siblings?
Yeah, sibling rivalry is something I'll talk about in the course. Look, some other basic things. And look, let me see, Wajdi, if I can get up. I even don't mind if people want to have a meeting link that people can schedule with me.
Sure. I'm sorry. I just posted your email. I just posted your email right now on the chat.
So that link, I just gave you a link to my Calendly. Because I mean, personally, I enjoy getting these questions through the chat and then talking off of them. But a lot of times these situations, they need to be unpacked a little bit. So if you'd like to talk a little bit more extensively, I'm more than happy to do that. Okay. Awesome. And this is a whole thing about parenting. It's the case now, if you have a child bullying their other siblings, okay, something has built up to that point. Really solving the root cause of the situation is going to involve identifying what things took place that led up to that and how we talk to that child. Now, in the moment, some basic things, when siblings get into disputes, you want to be careful about trying to solve the dispute for them. That, especially if you didn't see what was going on. That's a mistake that parents make a lot. You get into this he said, she said thing with them when you don't really know what's going on, and you're trying to pretend that you have authority and know-how that you don't. So you don't want to get into those things. But a sibling who's bullying the other siblings, this is a situation where you as a parent, that sibling who's doing the bullying and they're not listening to you, they've taken some power over you. And you have to understand that. So you're going to have to get them to buy in to changing their behavior. And this is just another thing too about parenting. Sometimes with our kids, we're pretending like we have more power than we really do. And a lot of times things like yelling and trying to force things is a manifestation of that. And when kids get older and they start testing those boundaries and they get a sense that you don't really mean what you say, because you don't even have the ability to follow through on what you say, then we've sent the message that we're fake, we're hypocritical, we don't really have the control that we say that we do, and then they start trying to take it from us. So I mean, these types of situations are things to unpack, and that's why I provide the link. And don't feel shy about scheduling a meeting. I'm more than happy to talk to people. It will help provide me fuel to talk more about these things on my own channel, which is Abraham Education on YouTube, this type of thing.
Wonderful. Jazakallah khairan. How to deal with I think a lot of these questions are redundant, or maybe their wordings are different, but they're addressing the same core problem.
Look, something about 10-year-olds, the age 9 to 13, 14, 15, kids are going to start getting irritable around age 8, 9, and it really is only going to increase up until age 14, 15. They will start testing boundaries in a way where they want to experiment with doing things that they know adults won't want to. It's the ages where they will first start seeing kids at school define the authority of adults for the sake of impressing their peers, and some kids will bring those types of things home and start experimenting with them. You have to understand that the irritation that those kids are doing to you is completely normal. Developmentally, it's normal. I'm not saying that you just let it go and that excuses it. But what you have to let that understanding do for you is allow in yourself to have the patient disposition that allows you to not take it personal and allows you to not be affected by it. It's similar to the bullying dynamic. When your child acts rude, vulgar, or whatever, and they see a reaction out of you, the message that you are sending them is that you have control over me when you do this. So when you react emotionally to that, you react in a tense way to that, you're sacrificing your own power and control over them to the child. And they will get a rush out of that. A lot of kids will get a rush out of that, and then they'll just keep doing it. So how do you deal with them instead? Again, this is like the first thing I'm going to be talking about in my parenting course. It's stuff you have to learn. Stuff you have to learn, practice, but there's a method to it. June 11th, Abraham Education.
Inshallah. So speaking of this, the what do you call it? The bracket for that age.
Yeah, those late elementary school, middle school, and maybe freshman, sophomore year of high school. And those are the best ages to not have kids in
allow
school.
me to intervene and say that sin al-ghalaza is what we call it in Lebanon. The age of irritation begins at the age of 3 and then ends when you're buried in the grave. That's what we've seen. It starts at a certain age, and then for whatever reason, it just does not seem to end or stop. It's just an ongoing thing as you grow into adulthood, and then you become a grown man. Still irritating. Nah, it's okay. I understand. Some ages are worse than others.
This questioner asked. They said, "I have self-control issues." It is a reality of parenting, working with young people, that this is oftentimes the first thing you need to work on. And techniques of how to stay relaxed in these tense situations are some of the most important things to learn. Sure. And it's small stuff that just involve breathing, relaxing your face, that type of thing. But, sometimes the parents to tell themselves, well, I have self-control issues or something like that. You have to let go of your self-impression of that, because the more you tell yourself that, the more you are going to have those issues. You have to be willing to grow yourself. How do you expect your child to grow well if you can't grow well yourself?
Yeah, it begins with the parents more often than not. How to teach? We were almost done. Why did these questions come up? Where do they come from? How to teach kids the basics of the religion without confusing them? How would you teach them the basics of fiqh? Do you know any books for kids? Allow me to handle that one, Michael. Barakallahu fikum. Habibi, how to teach the kids the basics of the religion? That's probably the easiest thing to do in the world, especially in this day and time where the resources are abundant and ample, and they're all over the place. And yes, there are plenty of books that have been authored with kids in mind, language-wise, the principles, everything has been tailored to accommodate kids. So you just have to invest into one of these books from a sound resource. Darus Salam is generally reliable and straight to the point in this regard. And they have books on fiqh, and they have books on Quran, they have books on Salah, and the list goes on. Or as a parent, you could know enough about Islam to handle that on your own, and to, basically be able to communicate the simple aspect of the religion in a way that doesn't confuse the child. And no one knows your child, we assume, more than you. So you know what areas to cover, what areas to overlook, or to, skip for the time being. But it's basically getting the proper resources, and then, as the brother said earlier, making time for those matters to be covered. Don't expect them to happen casually, nonchalantly, while you're just going about your life and you think they're just going to figure it out. Though there has to be a setup where those things are taught to them in a systematic way, so that they have the proper understanding.
So daily reading time is a very powerful thing with kids. Sitting next to them when they're little. Honestly, you can start it when they are babies. As soon as they can sit in your lap and look in front of you, even if they don't understand it, they'll start making positive neurological connections with reading. And you can read to them things that are above their own level of understanding and explain it to them. And you don't have to go quickly through it. Just think I'll add to it.
Beautiful. A question perhaps related to the topic. How can a mom try to advise her older son regarding Islam while the son may be influenced by a teacher who's almost a Quranist? Okay, I'll take that one as well, just to remove the pressure of Brother Michael.
Nice.
So how can a mom try to? There's no such thing as a mom trying to advise her son. A mother advises her son. She does so with love. She does so benevolently. She does so with care and gentleness, and because she cares for her son genuinely, and she wants the best for him. And so, that matter is not to be taken lightly. If he's influenced by a teacher as a Quranist, then you're talking about borderline leaving Islam. If you don't believe in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, then you don't. Half of you, 3/4 of your Islam is gone. The Quran gives you general guidelines, and the Sunnah specifies those generalities that are in the Quran. You will not know how to pray, pay zakah. Most of the religion cannot be implemented or practiced without the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So the mother has to either outsource this advice from a reliable person who can speak with her son about the subject and educate him and show him evidences from the Quran and the Sunnah, and from the Quran in this case, to prove the authority and the authoritative nature of the Sunnah, or the mother is able to do that on her own. Most likely she will outsource it, but that's what it takes. It's a matter of providing the person with the textual evidences. And if they don't comply, then that's another situation. It's another discussion altogether. There's no point in going there now, hypothetically. But first of all, that would be the right course of action. Awareness and addressing the issue, but not out of enmity, not with violence, not with aggressiveness. It will backfire. It might, deter that person further from wanting to comply and adhere. A message of love and awareness would do the job, inshallah. If that person is sincere, they would find the path. Type. And what does that say? Why, when they act like kids, they are mocked, and when they act like teenagers, they're not given the responsibility? I must have missed the one before. What I have noticed that 10 to 13-year-old act irritatingly because they don't know whether to act like kids or teenagers. It's a weird mental area. When they act like kids, they are mocked, and when they act like teenagers, they're not given the responsibility.
Yeah, look, kids, again, beginning around age 9, that is when their awareness of peers is really going to increase from age 9, like up to age 14, in such a way that a lot of motivation about their behaviors is going to shift from wanting to please adults in their life to wanting to impress peers. Now, that still exists like in the later teenage years. However, they get to age 15, 16, 17. At that point, they start to really develop the ability to be able to connect with adults. It's actually a really important age to have adults influence kids who are not a part of the kid's family. That can be a very powerful thing. That's why teaching is actually an important profession for Muslims to be in and be involved in that and this type of thing. But a lot of that annoyance of those kids from 9 to 13, 14, you don't want to take it too personal. Because you don't want to react to it based on your stress reactions, where you start getting into a downward spiral emotionally with the kids and they start to resent you, because that can really backfire. You do have to wait it out to a degree. You want them to understand that the way they behave is something developmental. It's something developmental, and it's something that they'll see differently later on. You want to project that onto them. Kids will respond to what you project onto them.
SubhanAllah. All right. Well, that was I already mentioned that this was related to the previous question about the age of 10. Is it due because of pre-puberty?
Listen, something about puberty. Something I want people to understand, it's really a misunderstanding about teenagers and kids that they're like so driven by sex hormones, which is, obviously puberty is more than that, but that's what people associate. Yes, they have an increase in sex hormones when puberty arrives, but young people and teenagers, they are not driven by sex hormones like people think they are. And the amount of testosterone that they have is not on the same level as people in their 20s and 30s. The levels of it will increase throughout their ages. The basis of most of their actions is neurological, and it has to do with reformations going on with their brain if you want to identify a biological basis for it. And most of the needs that they have are emotional. And the reason I emphasize that point about hormones is, number one, it's somewhat a way that the West uses to sexualize young people in a way that they shouldn't, and that we don't want to buy into ourselves. Number two, it can be a way too that parents dismiss things sometimes. Like, oh, it's just sex hormones, and they'll be different when they get married or something like that, or whatever. Sometimes it's people come up with all types of excuses to just dismiss actually tending to things with kids, as opposed to solving the problem, because they don't have the confidence of how to do it. So most of their needs in these ages, they're emotional. They're emotional, and giving good guidance and this type of thing, giving them an idea of what their future is likely to be like, giving them an idea and knowledge that makes them understand their own developmental trajectory. All that stuff is very important, and I'll get into that type of thing in the course. So is the irritability due to pre-puberty? I mean, as far as pre-puberty, kids go through puberty at different ages. So a 9-year-old who ends up going through puberty at age 14 is very different than a 9-year-old who ends up going through puberty at age 10 or 11. But they're still going to have the same behavioral tendencies as far as being irritable, as far as testing the boundaries with what they can get away with petty defiance of adults. And that's all very common. And it doesn't matter when they go through puberty, you're going to see it.
Yeah. Beautiful. Okay, that's the last question right now, and I'm not going to take anything else. How do we get kids to start loving the scholars of Islam? Is hifz sufficient? I don't see the connection between hifz, if you mean of memorization of the Quran, or do you mean just general memorization? Well, how do you get them to start loving the scholars of Islam? By sharing their biographies, by taking the time to inform them about those figures, beginning with the Sahaba, because those were the most senior of scholars. The Prophet ﷺ is the epitome of scholarship and education, and this is from where all the inheritance that he left behind, ﷺ, this is where all the scholars have basically learned from, because it's divinely inspired, it's divinely revealed. It is not based on human intuitions and human exercise. Secondly, the Sahaba, being the prime figures and the individuals that portrayed the most excellent of manners and character, and their biggest concern for Islam and loving Islam and spreading this religion so that we receive it today comfortably, so that there's Bukhari and Muslim and Tirmidhi and Nasa'i and Abu Dawood. All of these are a byproduct of the efforts that the earlier generations had put forward for us to benefit from their dedication and their sacrifices. Those important core messages must be taught to the kids, and the biographies of the scholars have to be shared. Just the other day, I came across a talk by a Western professor who was teaching the biography of Khalid bin Walid to a non-Muslim audience. And the guy is a non-Muslim, and he was the most fascinated individual. He was so fascinated with Khalid bin Walid and his achievements that you just watch it and you're like, subhanallah. A person who knows about Khalid bin Walid more than, I would say, most of, if you bring 20, 30 fathers, and you ask them the questions about Khalid bin Walid, they will not be able to answer what that one man, a non-Muslim professor, was able to. Obviously, it's his job. He teaches history. But nevertheless, it's the point I'm trying to make is that there's a lot to be done in terms of sharing with them their noble sacrifices and their efforts. And anyone who has appreciation for Islam will accordingly and subsequently have appreciation and love for those scholars who Allah Azza wa Jal used as means to preserve his religion. Right. That concluded our wonderful orthodox or unorthodox session that we just had with Brother Michael. Jazakallah khairan for sharing your experience. Akhi barakallah feek. It was very beneficial. And thank you for sharing the link for the book, which you guys find in the comment section, your email address, and also the calendar link in case you would like to book Brother Michael for something more, particular or individual, private to you. Then you could do so as well. Along with subscribing to his channel, because he will be addressing a lot of the questions that we just kind of skimmed through, or we basically barely touched upon, will be elaborated on extensively in dedicated sessions, inshallah, on his channel. So make sure that you benefit from that and you share this with others بإذن الله عز وجل. So جزاكم الله خيرا and جزاك الله خير. Thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you again in the near future. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. جزاك الله خير.
وإياكم بارك الله فيك.